Yeah. All right, well, we'll
Not yet.
start anyway. Um, Tonight, we'd at
Oh,
least like
no.
to start talking about what's going on in the world. And I guess at this point, it's probably the major topic throughout the world, with the Middle East, which has been obviously in great turmoil for many, many years, boiling over. Uh, and of course, the issue that we're most concerned about is what do we the United States, do, if anything? And I imagine this is the kind of conversations that's happening throughout Burlington. Everybody's sitting at their dinner tables saying, boy, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? So,
Yes.
in any case, um, we're dealing with, right now it sounds like Obama's doing the absolute minimum he can, which is he's going to send some people to Iraq to try to get some information and maybe determine what could be done conceivably at some point in the future. And and he's keeping his options open, or not totally. He's already said he's not going to send the army back, which I believe is a good thing, but means that there will probably be no resolution that we particularly like. Does anybody else have some thoughts?
Well, let me add a little bit of historical perspective to this. That given what we know about Middle East, you have a lot of animosity which is historical, and at the same time you also have the artificial boundaries that were created after the British Mandate, or whatever the mandate was called during previous times.
League of
Now,
Nations.
League of Nations,
Yeah.
and because of the inherent tribal nature and the religious nature of the strife, which cannot be actually bridged easily. What is happening is, I think we have been caught in the middle in such a way that the Arab Spring happened, and we thought that the Arab Spring is going to really create a momentum for freedom. And we looked at Libya, we looked at Syria, and in Syria we had we thought that people were rising up against Syrian Assad, and who should we support? So the people try to think about maybe we should support the opposition, but the problem is opposition came up with multiple factions, and Assad is one particular one particular basis of religion, which is the Shia side, but then the opposition is Sunni, but then Sunni has fractions in it. So I think Obama administration was caught off guard in that who to support, and because of that, because the Assad was supported by Iran, Iran is Shia, and on the other hand, if they supported Assad, they were essentially supporting Iran. If they supported the different Sunni factions which were more extreme, they were also out to get Saudi Arabia people, kings, so they couldn't support them. But on the other hand, moderate groups do not have the required training, who have essentially been teachers and pharmacists. And somebody was talking about that earlier today, that they could not get up and really raise the resistance against Assad, which could have been done. But that's where United States was caught in that who to support. So they supported the moderate faction, which did not have the same wherewithal that the Sunni faction, which is extremist, had. They have the ability to recruit a lot of other Sunni people, Sunni insurgents, and they had a plan, and that plan was actually to take the take the sites that provided them with enough money, with the funds to really get the arms, really recruit more people, and to mobilize in such a way that they now have come into Iraq, and they have taken advantage of the Maliki faction who are also Sunnis. They have essentially welcomed them. And so what are we going to do? Now this time now you want to support Maliki, but he is Shia. Essentially you have to put the fire down somehow. So you will be supporting the Iraqi government rather than Maliki. That's what they should kind of look at that way. Support Iraqi government to put the fire down and then deal with Maliki, who is not able to involve all factions within Iraq.
Well,
That's what he needs to
given
do.
that there's so many competing factions with competing agendas, it's very hard for someone from the outside to understand, let alone manage. And should they? And for that matter, and that's the thing, we were happy that Iraq had seemingly achieved some form of democracy, and the state was peaceful for a while. But that was looking at this. Always bothered me when Bush went into it, that he was looking at this whole area through an American lens. It's not America. It doesn't have the same values, the same history, the same conflicts, the same anything. And so the nature of what would be a democratic state, a free state, may be extremely different in terms of what the American perception of that should be and what it will become.
Actually, the same mistake, what you projected, same mistake is being made by a lot of people who speak about we should go into Iraq right now with all the boots and all the guns blazing and conquer and do things. But they are not looking at rationally that you cannot really replicate what we have. That's the problem.
I don't think you're talking about the right thing. The reason we want to go back into Iraq is we spent billions of dollars reorganizing their oil infrastructure, and that's at stake.
But who are we to presume to do that?
That's why we went there in the first
well,
place.
we shouldn't have gone there in the first place.
Of course we shouldn't have gone there in the first place,
just
but that's
annoys
why
me.
we went there in the first place. And people who are looking at it can see this thing all falling apart. We basically sent American military in to get rid of Saddam Hussein, redo their oil infrastructure because it was terrible. Instead of having oil companies pay for it, the U.S. government paid for it, and and the oil companies are getting the profits from it. And now they see the infrastructure and the oil being transferred not to the oil companies but to Iraq and whoever, and the Sunnis and whoever they choose to sell it to. So there's a tremendous amount of money at stake for.
Well, that's what's motivating everyone.
But right now, that is in fact what is at stake, to preserve and protect the oil revenue or oil refineries, preserve the oil wells somehow. And I'm hoping that we have a strategy to do that. And then I'm hoping we have a strategy to get rid of this government which is right there, and not directly but somehow diplomatically to place somebody in there who can become inclusive.
Why can't if America is already involved in it, why can't they cast a wider net in terms of finding someone more inclusive?
You've got to find somebody
Well, that's what
who's acceptable
I
and more
know.
inclusive.
That's my point. They don't seem to be looking very broadly.
Well, there's a meeting going on, I think Fallujah, but I'm not sure, as we speak, where the Shia factions are getting together to try to decide what they want to do. Obviously, one of the things they can do is support Maliki. They could look at another person from the same area and maybe put their trust in him or her. But,
That would be good.
But the
Sorry.
I was trying to be inclusive.
Well,
You guys,
this is here, that is there.
well, I got
That's
some
right.
comments
Even I
on
know
that in a
that.
little bit. But the United States says, and it may be much too late for that, but the United States says if you're going to change the government, which we would like them to do, you have to change it in such a way that everybody's included. If the Sunnis have basically said, this is not for us, and we don't like these nuts, but maybe they can accomplish what we're not willing to do, and then we'll control them afterwards. The same kind of logic was used with the Nazis, but very much so in Germany. But there's another way of looking at this thing, which it just occurred to me that we really have to be worried about. The Middle East for most of the 20th century, or certainly after World War I, was ruled secularly. Dictators,
Yes.
whatever. It was secular leadership. The religious divides were held down, in some cases very violently. And the opposition to the secular government was always based around an extreme religious group. Somewhat similar to what's happening in the United States today, which we can get back to later. What's happened is when we allowed the secular leadership to be displaced, what we got was majority, generally, religious factions, and then the concerns of the religious became paramount. The problem with Maliki saying, we'll support the Iraqi government, not Maliki, the Iraqi government is identified as Maliki in
At this
not
time.
only
At this time,
our
yes.
minds, but in the minds of the people. In the same way, again, in the United States, we stopped thinking about America and the flag and how wonderful it is. The government, the federal government, is Obama. And if you don't like Obama, then it's a short step to not liking the government and wanting to replace it with something closer to
Your values.
your values. In many cases, the groups trying to replace it are religious.
But you also have to see right at this moment while this fire is burning right outside Baghdad, what is happening is the Shia leader on one side says, join the army, we'll fight against these people. Shia religious leader. The Sunni religious leader says, what a tragedy that these, we should support the invading, they will deliver us against this terrible government who has been oppressing us. So you can see now that's a dichotomy right there. Which way is the population going to go? That's what has happened in the northern areas. Wherever the ISIS came in, people welcomed them.
In some cases, the military leaders were bribed,
Well, how
saying
is
the
ISIS
government.
going to handle all the Shia that are there?
They're so far
if
they
they
have
win?
not. They haven't gotten.
What are they going to do? I mean, they still
They'd
have
be perfectly happy to
Yeah.
just create their own little ISIS
Yes.
in
Never
northern
know.
Syria and northern Iraq, or northwestern Iraq,
Northwestern Iraq, yeah.
and say this is ours.
Yes.
And you do whatever you want. We may fight you over
so they
oil
may
fields.
splinter
That is
Yeah.
the danger right now, that it could become Kurds on one side, Shia on one side, another side, northwestern
Well,
part
you
would
can
be
argue
Sunnis,
that, that,
and
so,
then there
so
will be
along,
constant
along,
battle.
along religious lines. Well, look what's happening. Look what's happened for years with Israel. Israel is, I mean, that's it's along religious lines. So what?
But this will have repercussions if that is allowed. Actually, if that happens, this will have repercussions for whole Middle East, as is happening right now. You see that where is Assad's people going to go? Where are the Christians in Iraq going to go? Where are the
What's
other
gonna happen to
minorities in
Jordan?
Syria going to go?
Which
What's
is
going to happen in
Sunni,
Jordan?
but it's secular.
Yes,
ISIS doesn't believe in
No.
secularism.
they want to get rid of
So
them.
they want to get rid of them, and they want to take, and I'm sure they will find a way to hop down to Egypt as well.
And the same problem,
Turkey.
same problem is with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabian prince people, prince, all the upper people. They don't want them, but the common people, they have warm feelings for such people. So what can you do? I don't know what the solution is. I am hoping that Obama has a better strategy than any of us. In my
He may, but that doesn't mean it's the one that's coming out. It may be the one that is most popular with the largest group of voting government people. I mean, with
the advisors.
not
No,
advisors, with
representatives.
congressmen and senators.
Well, we know
Thank
that
you.
the majority of Congress opposes anything that Obama does other
In
than when
general,
he stops
yeah.
breathing.
Yeah,
That-
yeah.
They're okay with that, but not, they haven't thought it through.
Well, but if they can claim as their own whatever he does, then it'll be okay because we told
No.
them to do.
No, they,
No.
Even
look,
that?
they freed this poor schlub, the soldier.
Yes.
Yep.
The Republican Congress was demanding that something be done, and he did it. And
as early as
amazingly
2 or
enough,
3
it was
days
wrong.
before.
We're not even sure we wanted to get him back.
But what is also
You
ironic.
mean
2 months ago-
2 months ago they wanted him back,
Yes,
and then they
they
didn't
were
want him back?
making speeches in Congress
US
saying you've
President
got
I
to do
missed
this.
that. I
They,
missed
they
that.
were making speeches for months.
Yes.
A year ago, 1 year.
And now he's throwing it in their faces.
A year
and-
ago.
and they're saying,
No, you're wrong. This is a deserter. We shouldn't have got him back. You gave up too much. We have a call? I can't read
we
it.
can't see it.
A year ago, they announced what the deal would be. This guy for those 5.
It was
Yes.
212, I thought.
Well, okay,
Okay,
more than a year.
2 years ago, yeah.
More
Okay.
than a year ago, it was discussed, and somebody
We
leaked.
can't see it.
And somebody leaked the idea, and then the whole thing fell apart.
What is also ironic.
But this is what the Republicans were suggesting that Obama do.
Yes.
Take this deal. We want our soldier
And-
back.
and- oh, by the way, this
the
is the
Republicans
notification-
are people in the wasteland. They're wandering. They're looking for the thing to hold on to.
No, they know what to hold on to.
No, they don't.
If Obama
No,
goes
they
here,
don't.
they're going to go there.
Well, but that makes them look like fools.
Unfortunately, they're going to be more popular fools now than they were before.
Well,
Our Congress is going to be much more Republican than it was. for the
Much more
past 2
conservative,
years.
you mean?
And Republican.
not-
Yeah, and Republican.
Well, even
Do not confuse Republicans with conservatives. Republicans are not conservative.
Republicans are not conservative. But their Tea Party is conservative. Is that what you're saying?
No, they're not
There
conservative.
is one
either.
guy, I mean, this Cantor has lost.
A conservative, do they want to protect the forests at the expense of companies? No, they don't. Do they want to protect the budget, protect the money? No, they don't. They say borrow the money. It started with Reagan. It got out of hand with Bush, and it'll be if we had a $250 billion budget surplus every year, it will take 2 generations to get back to where we were when Clinton left office.
understand
That's a sobering
something.
thought.
The
That's a
moment we
sobering
have a
thought.
That is.
surplus, exactly what happened under Bush would happen.
It's our money, give it
Give
back
it
to
back.
us.
Yeah, the people have overpaid, give it back to them. We're not worried about these deficit. That's not the issue. The issue is get smaller government. Everything else
The
pales.
Republican Party are genius at reshaping and reframing the argument to their needs and their goals. They are geniuses at that. The Democratic Party just doesn't do it that way. It speaks more straightly about what is the obvious point to be made.
Actually, appropriate to that is Dick Cheney's
yeah.
op-ed he wrote in Wall Street Journal.
With his daughter.
With his daughter, and then said that this is the biggest mistake president has made, and all the this, how much of error can a president
and,
be in?
And CNN this morning said the last thing we need to do is take advice about war or
Actually-
not war from Dick Cheney.
He is absolutely right, and Bush is guilty. Seriously. Bush started a war.
Bush started a war, yes.
I mean, the Bush administration with, probably.
Well, certainly wasn't
The
Bush,
Cheney
right.
administration,
Yeah.
but Bush was there.
Yes.
And since then, in his 8 years of office, his average deficit was $750 billion. Now, they will deny it
Yes,
up
of
and
course.
down, but he was there for 8 years, and the national debt increased by $6 trillion. $6 trillion divided by 8 is $750 billion.
Yeah.
And when he left office, we were in the middle of the worst recession
Yes.
since the Depression. And you can't climb out of it if the government won't.
Well, the government didn't care. The government didn't care about the people. They just cared about the people who greased their palms at the
Yes.
time.
Well, during the last few months, actually, of Bush regime, they tried to recoup. They tried to somehow patch up things and get things rolling back.
Wasn't
But,
that swell of
I
them?
mean, that they tried because they knew that everything was getting. They essentially
Maybe
were
they can
bankrupt.
sell some of George, the most recent, George 43's pictures.
Oh,
his
yeah.
his new art.
He is actually, it's interesting. He makes nice
Oh,
pictures.
please,
He
it's,
makes
he's a rival for Grandma Moses.
But he makes nice pictures.
Why can't he do pictures?
He can do them,
Fine.
but
It's much better that he do.
that's right.
I mean, would you rather have George Bush out there with Cheney?
No.
No, he is actually. I'm
Smart.
impressed. He is smart enough to
Yes.
stay the heck out of the way.
Yes.
And he's very happy to stay out of it. He didn't want to. I don't think he wanted to be president when he was president.
That's
quite
not
honestly.
clear.
I don't think it's that
Certainly,
unclear.
Cheney early on had control. And what Cheney's doing right now is he's fighting for his legacy. And failing, but maybe he can declassify something else at some point. And
But that's what when they started. I mean, if they went into Iraq and started the war, the first major mistake they made is get rid of all the Ba'ath Party-related people, and that essentially collapsed, made the whole system collapse, and we were left with zero.
well, even worse than that, I mean, that was bad.
Yeah.
But do you understand denazification in Germany, et cetera?
Yes.
And there were problems with it.
Yes.
The worst thing they did was they went in and said, we are not an occupying force.
Yes.
We are not going to put MPs on the street corners to control things. So they allowed the criminal element, the mafia, the 47,000 mafias that organized themselves in Iraq to control everything. And then they didn't understand why nothing worked. Because nobody talked to each other. Nobody had any loyalty to the central government. The person they assumed was going to take over, that they had anointed before the war, had no support whatsoever.
He has
couldn't
disappeared.
do-
He has disappeared. I don't know where
That
he
was a
went.
smart thing to do.
I forgot his name
The-
actually.
what they did was they solidified the oil ministry, and that's it. That's why we went there. They solidified the oil ministry and then started working on the oil infrastructure, and that's the only thing they did, other than have troops around to try to, I don't know, do what.
But with the creaking infrastructure, even that cannot be held together when you have the rest of the machinery not working. And I don't know how they thought everything will be hunky dory.
What do you mean? The oil infrastructure needed billions and billions
Yes.
of dollars invested in it because Saddam didn't do anything to keep it up. So they needed to they needed to redo the oil infrastructure. And now Iraq is producing oil.
Yes, but what I was saying is at that time you did need a certain infrastructure which was knowledgeable They got rid of all those people. So they
I'm
had to
talking
recreate
about oil infrastructure. I'm not talking about streets. I'm not talking about
just the oil.
oil only.
Okay.
Oil only. That's the only concern they ever had.
That's interesting. So that's now
And-
our duty is now to make sure that doesn't fall apart.
Well, if you're if you're an oil executive, that's the only thing that's important in Iraq.
Okay.
I think it's a big endeavor to reshape a country, let alone reshape a country that has a culture that is literally foreign to the one that's trying to shape it. We have to have participation from willing people in Iraq, from the Sunnis, from the Shias, creating a situation that is nonviolent, secure, and at least amenable to all parties. Somehow, you got to talk about the religious
Yes.
values. You have to come to some common ground about them so that people can live together. They have to.
Well,
They have to, or they're just going to annihilate each other.
Or they're
Every-
going to divide into 3 warring countries, but the wars will be relatively small,
Well,
border wars.
I mean, what is the point of more war? It doesn't do anything except kill people, scorch earth, ruin economies. What is the point? There is no point, in my opinion.
There is a point. The point is, for example, from the ISIS point of view, they need to create the greater Syria and Levant. So that means they want to create the old caliphate, the way it was supposed to be, and restrict and have strict Sharia laws, so that if you are a woman, you got to wear head to toe thingy, and you cannot drive, you cannot go anywhere without the man around, and at the same time you have to get up early morning and have the 5 times go to the prayer, and you cannot do this, you cannot do the other, you can be shot for doing some things. So the strict Sharia law will be imposed, and that's the way they want. And if they have guns, that's what's going to happen. If they have and they are slowly collecting more and more resources. If you have a resourceful insurgency, nobody's going to be able to stop it.
Well, they managed to loot the banks in Mosul, so they have $450 million.
Oh, that's good enough for a few days.
Yeah. But every group wants it their way. We don't like this particular group.
The guy who won the Nobel Prize for, I guess, I don't know, mathematics, I guess it was, in A Beautiful Mind.
Oh,
Nash.
Nash, thank you. He won that prize because he came up with a theory, a competitive theory, that nobody gets exactly what they want. You have to give up some stuff in order to move forward.
When God
That's what
says,
has to.
when God says you don't have to compromise, that's what's happening to American politics.
And you don't need a Nobel Prize for that, right?
Well, you could get one. I mean, what's wrong with that?
No, there's no Nobel Prize for God.
When the problem is when you know you're right. I don't remember, was it you? It was either Paul or Omanon who was telling me this. At one point, they were talking to a guy in Iran or Saudi Arabia, one or the other, and they were saying that, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And they said, once you know you're right,
Yes.
why try anything else?
Yes. That's it. That's the argument. Yes, actually, there's a preacher who was asked the question. I remember that there was a preacher who was asked this question: why is it that there are no churches in Saudi Arabia? Why are there no churches in Muslim countries? He says, Christian churches for that matter, or any other. He said, well, if you were to hire a mathematics teacher, you're going to ask him what is 2 plus 2. He's going to say 5. Are you going to hire him? No. It says 3. You're going to hire him? No. So the only thing, if a person says 2 plus 2 is 4, then you hire the mathematics teacher. We know that we have the truth. So why should we introduce another one when we know they're not carrying the truth? I mean, appropriate to that is there was a Pakistani physicist. You asked about the Nobel Prize winner. There was a particle physicist, Nobel Prize winner. He's a Muslim. He was a Muslim. He was from Pakistan, and he was at CERN in Italy, and he got Nobel Prize for physics a few years ago. And his last wish was he be buried in Pakistan. But he was buried in Italy. But then they exhumed and took the body, and then I mean he's supposed to be, I mean, he's a physics Nobel Prize winner in Pakistan. He should be a national hero. He was refused to be buried there, and they somehow because he belonged to not the majority Sunni faction. And so they have now somehow buried him at a place in Pakistan, and his tomb is not a national monument. It is just a tomb there, and people don't go there. Although he's supposed to be he's a Nobel Prize winner in particle physics. What else do you want? But this is the divide. And how can you if you cannot come around and rally around a Nobel Prize winner, what are you going to rally around?
I'll give you another one. We have a new pope. The Pope said some stuff about the fact that we need to take care of the poor. Suddenly he's a communist.
Yes,
Suddenly we don't have to listen to him anymore because obviously he doesn't speak for God anymore. It's not the individuals who can say, if Rush Limbaugh turned around and said, you know what, maybe Obama isn't that bad. He really is trying some stuff, and some of the stuff he's trying may not be so bad. He'd be off the air.
Yeah.
Because no one, if you change your mind like that, either you're being forced at the point of a gun or you've gone nuts. Either way, why should I listen?
I was pointing out in the beginning that how we got caught up in this Arab Spring thing, and there was uprising in Syria, and we were in a dilemma who to support. If you look at the whole Middle East politics and the divide there is, the best option for us was to ignore that Arab Spring peace in Syria and support Assad, because he would have been able to hold and contain this, what is happening right now. It would not have happened, because what has happened is because of the opposition and all this bloodbath that is happening still happening in Syria. All these that became a magnet for all the jihadis, and they have been able to recruit these extremists. And now, because they became emboldened, Assad is coming down on them. They have found an outlet in Iraq. So there you go, and they are going to. If they are not contained, it's going to be a problem for whole Middle East. Not only in Middle East, rest of the world as well. By the way, there is, I read a few days ago, there is a video the same ISIS people have created to go and create a jihad in Kashmir. Because it's India is ruling Kashmir. This is interesting. I thought, isn't it interesting that they are trying to propagate all over the place? But that's why you need to stop it somewhere, somehow. I'm hoping Obama has a strategy.
Why does it have to be only us? Why
Well,
can't it be the
I
rest of the
don't
world?
see
Who
it.
else has the power? Assuming we
I don't
even
think
have
we-
the power.
I don't think
but
we
who-
do.
I don't
Well,
think
we
we
may
have the
not.
power. You're talking about hundreds of millions of people.
Yes.
But most of those people, like the American Revolution, we glorify the American Revolution. 10% of Americans, people in the colonies,
wanna do it.
wanted the revolution to some extent. 10% were violently opposed to it. 80% just wanted to be left alone. Just let me farm my land and do whatever.
Yeah.
And they were caught and swept up
And there was
into
no
things.
news bureau. There were Paul Revere's, but there was no news.
Well,
if you look
So
at
to, you know,
yeah.
to incite
But
and to continually.
of course, there was news.
foment.
Whatever newspapers there were, whatever news there was
But it
controlled
wasn't-
by one group or the other.
Right, but
and
it-
you
it-
chose who to believe.
Okay, all right.
they
But that's
did-
true with everything.
Right.
Everybody drinks some kind of Kool-Aid.
Yes.
Well,
About everything, about brands, about people, about everything.
at one point, until about 8 years ago, I think it was, there was a place where people would go to find out what was really true. It was called the New York Times and CBS. This is what, if you really wanted to know what was going on, you listen
Well, I
to
think
them.
CBS
You
is,
listen
is
to Walter
still doing
Cronkite.
that now.
But nobody believes them.
I think they
Dan
do.
Rather got caught up
Yes.
in a story.
What, you don't believe Scott Pelley?
Scott Pelley.
No one
well,
believes
there is Scott Pelley.
CBS anymore.
Well,
It's
there is
just-
the other guy.
I don't agree with you. I
Charlie
believe-
Rose. Charlie Rose is a good.
I don't like
good-
Charlie Rose.
You don't like?
No, I think
Yeah,
he's
you have to,
kind of.
You have to listen to his
he's
insights
very,
in
I've
interviews.
listened to lots of things to him, but I not that I don't like him.
I think
he's
the problem
very
is-
urban.
The problem is there's a large group of people that believe everything that they hear on Fox. And it's hard to believe that that's true. But, you know,
What
Well, it's all-
percentage do you think that is?
30.
Wow.
It's all tied up with you know the you know with the American version of right and church, and I mean it's tied up with a lot of things that and
God said.
conservatism, and it is. I mean I wouldn't believe a thing on Fox. I can't watch it. I mean it's so
I have a
blatantly.
good friend who's a director on the morning show.
Well, I don't. That's good for you. I mean, and I'm sure he's a very nice person, but that's
He
not
is.
the point.
Yes.
That is not the point. They are slanted. Well, so is MSNBC.
Right. Actually, for only recently, over the past 10 years or so, it became slanted. For a long time,
Yeah,
they were
I agree.
pretty much down the middle.
Yeah. Now, have any of you ever listened to the BBC at all?
Not, in a long
Not
time.
lately, but
Okay.
that is
well,
supposed to be.
they're very
supposed to be
yeah, they are
objective.
well, and also the news that they provide is much more varied and it's much broader in terms of reach, what they talk about.
The other thing that BBC does is when they have an interview and the guy starts just babbling, they nail him immediately and demand that he explain what he's doing and what are you saying, whereas the American press, just simply lets the guy go and say whatever he wants because
They're afraid because they're
people
not that
will know
good a
if he's
reporter.
right or wrong. Yeah,
Well, no, they won't.
yeah, right.
Well, that's
the
and
American
that's unfortunate.
people aren't stupid.
That's unfortunate
probably the
because
wo-
George Stephanopoulos. Here's a great example. This guy used to be an absolutely terrific interviewer on Sunday mornings, and I don't know why in the world he took on the role of Good Morning America MC or whatever the heck he is. He's so hapless there. He's so ineffective. He's so weak in every way, and he's got to smile along with all the ridiculous pieces of non-news that are really infotainment that is on that program.
Well, that's the morning show. Isn't that supposed to be
There
like
are
that?
varying grades of
Yeah.
morning shows. I don't watch Today because I can't stand the whole cast of characters.
Okay.
But ABC's Good Morning America has become so infotainment oriented. They're just a bunch of happy people, and they relegate the news to like 2 minutes or 5 minutes at the beginning of each hour, I guess. And after that, it's all nonsense. And he is in the middle of it, and he doesn't say anything. He just sits there. And maybe he doesn't like it, but he's certainly paying the bills.
So have you
But
watched?
I
Have
mean,
you watched CBS? in the
Yes,
morning?
and I do watch CBS because I find it much more credible. That's what
Yes.
I'm getting at. That CBS is
That
a
is
real
when Charlie
news.
Rose is on
Yes,
there.
he's on there. He's on at night.
Yeah.
But I find Charlie Rose a little. I don't know. I like Scott Pelley better.
But they
I
have
find him
more
credible.
content, in fact,
Yes,
in the morning.
yes,
Yes,
and more newsworthy content.
so that
yes.
gets you going.
And they do something that the museum does in Washington. I think it's the top of the second hour at 8 o'clock. They give the news around the country and sometimes around the world that's appearing in that day's newspaper,
I see, wow.
which I found is very interesting.
Okay.
But I think they're much more credible than either of the other stations. And I find, and perhaps George Stephanopoulos, just to get back to him, is kind of a metaphor for what's going on with the American press today. That you're right, they are afraid to cut in and say, look, that's not what I asked you, this is what I asked you, can you answer that question? And they really do.
I did read a report about Megyn Kelly on Fox News, but I've not watched her.
Yeah.
But it looks like she took Cheney and his daughter on the discussion about that you created the problem and what is your explanation. So apparently people are all praise for Megyn Kelly. I have not watched her, so I don't know. That's the report I read.
I saw a portion of it.
Okay.
And Cheney, to his credit, said it's all not true.
I
and,
see, okay.
And I wouldn't have changed anything.
Oh, okay.
Well, he's defending his legacy.
Right, exactly.
Uh,
And so,
What
I
else
don't-
is he
I don't
going
know
to do?
whether-
Of course he's going to defend his legacy.
Whether it was a setup or, because she did introduce it in a, quote, hostile way.
I see, okay.
But then she let him say it's all not true, and
So there was no questions asked. Is that, or you were just basic?
her question was a long build-up to
I
this
see,
one
okay.
question,
problem-
and he said no.
Oh, that's the answer.
The problem, though, is with if you're a reporter, you're asking questions of a news source. They give you an answer, indirect, through around a perception, whatever. If you have to be careful how you challenge it, because then you're editorializing.
Right.
If you're not, so you have to kind of mediate that issue too, and that's complicated.
well,
But
some
okay, but at
people are
least we can
better
do
and
that
worse at
here.
it, yeah.
At least we can do that here.
Tim Russert
Apparently-
was very good at that.
Okay.
Nobody
All right.
we've seen so far has been to that level. But again, you cannot go to CBS. You cannot go to the New York Times and say, okay, this is what they said happened. And all the rest of this stuff is interpretation or ignorance or whatever, because nobody will believe, well, it's New York Times, it's obviously liberal. It's CBS, it's obviously liberal. And so the moment they put the title on that it's something uncredible,
Well,
then they don't have to believe it.
There's no news that doesn't come from a specific source. In terms of a distribution channel.
Right.
There's always going to be a specific bias, always.
But even then,
Can you where would you say? Is it-
Associated Press is as close as I can
Okay,
come to.
all right. and I would
but
agree,
even
okay.
then, as news by itself, shouldn't it be impartial? Without
How can it be?
I mean, for example, you present something, and then you could have a discussion. That's a different story, different issue,
Right.
rather than just present the story with a color.
That's what CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal say they do. When you end a news story with a quote or a statement of fact, that's not drawing a conclusion. That's just putting the facts out there.
I mean, you also
You can put out a fact, 60. That's a fact. I'll give
60?
you an interpretation, 60 degrees.
That's not an interpretation. That's a
Well,
fact.
it's explaining 60.
Okay.
60 degrees. Unless you know context, it is meaningless.
but that's why this.
But that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
But
That's
the
why this-
context is in every news story.
See, what I find is, I think
But
Americans.
just because it's context doesn't mean that it's biased.
But it can be, because depending upon, if they don't present the whole context, which could take hours, that describes one lousy little car accident, they pick and choose what the context is, and that immediately provides a bias in one direction or another.
I don't know that I agree with
Well,
that.
there is a issue. There is a big issue actually for us, all of us actually, that we don't have enough time to spend to listen to that whole context,
Yeah,
and we want a sound bite, and we want to get just for that.
You know, I was just talking about this issue about content development with a colleague, with someone this afternoon, about how today, you know, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of stories, a lot of content on the web, just a lot of stuff. But what we want now is snackable content that we can look at our mobile devices and be able to get the gist of whatever it is in that space. We don't want the long 12-page story or the 10-page white paper. Well, it may be there, but we want a short
One sentence.
Well, maybe not one sentence. I
Maybe
mean,
two.
that's a little.
Maybe two.
To tweet it is a little ridiculous, but
That's what happens,
I
actually.
know, but we want something that is snack sized.
And we want, following it immediately, the solution.
That's
Done.
it.
We're finished. I can now go on with my life.
I mean,
Is that? And that's just not going to happen. I mean, that's a factor. That's an American thing. And it's spread all over the world. I'm not saying it's not,
Yes.
but you know, that's an American cultural thing that has caught on all over the world.
Yes, it has spread throughout the world, actually. And at the same time, we as we were talking about earlier, that Middle East by itself is so complicated. You cannot have a one-line solution or a two-line solution. And you cannot have a one-day solution. You have to provide a long-term, somehow long-term ongoing process that will bring all parties together. And look what we have been doing, trying to do that between Israel and Palestine for the last, 60 years?
Well, let's see, 1947.
Yeah.
Where have we gotten?
Well, at least they're still standing.
Two of the leaders were assassinated in the meantime,
Yeah.
trying to get those together. And I don't know. I mean, I hope, that's why I'm still hoping Obama has a strategy, a better strategy than what it was earlier.
There's never going to be, you know, a best way. We're all human, so we're going to be slogging along,
Yes.
and you know, we're going to take 3 steps ahead and 2 steps back all the time. That's,
One hopes.
yeah, maybe, yeah, at least that in that way. I mean, I don't think that there's a simple answer. The problems seem just so overwhelming just to describe that. So speaking of that,
wait a minute.
okay.
You don't think that there's a simple answer? Of course, there's not a simple answer because, as you said, the problems are so involved that they require people to step back and look at the whole problem and come up with a series of solutions that are intertwined so that you can solve the problem. You know, what the country should do, what the president should do, is go to the Pentagon, where there are a bunch of systems engineers, give them a problem, and say, "This is the problem," and come up with a solution that has all of these things intertwined.
You know what? I'm just reading a book now by David. I think it's David Baldacci.
Baldacci, yeah.
It's called The Simple Truth. And it's about a group of people who live somewhere on an island in Virginia who are trying to come up with a quantum computer.
Wow.
And that's what they need. That's what we need, a quantum computer, because a quantum computer could look at every possible scenario for every problem and come up with the best one. We don't have that yet.
There's a
Well,
minor
actually,
problem
that-
with that. When you have the quantum computer
Yeah.
and you come up with all the possible solutions, you've got to evaluate them.
Well, and
And
but
once
the-
you
but the-
evaluate
but the-
them, but you have to know what good is.
right.
But
That's
you don't
subjective.
agree with me as to what good is.
Well,
Absolutely
but
not.
if you raise the the term of good to a mathematical function, it will come up with an answer. It may not be the answer that you want, but it will come up with it.
Well,
But that's the whole point. If I come up with an answer, but it's not one I like, then we go on to the next one. If I'm the one who's actually going to implement it, if somebody else is, then I'm going to be pissed at that person because they're not doing.
So that's not
the
going to
right
work
thing.
either, huh?
The problem is we don't agree. We don't have any basis. We don't even have a generic thing that we can agree on and say what would be good.
Well, okay. but perhaps that's where some things need to be dealt with from a different perspective, to find common ground in other things before we agree on what's good or that we don't agree on what's good.
Well,
Find other kinds of common ground to agree
I'll
on.
give you an example. The conservatives and the liberals have common ground in immigration reform. The common ground is strengthen the border so that you have less people coming in. The conservatives are perfectly willing to go along with that and stop because they want less Hispanics basically to come into the country. The liberals want to deal with everything else. The conservatives, no, let's deal with what we agree with, and then we'll worry about other stuff later. When you're dealing in a democracy, and probably in many other forms of government, including dictatorship, you have to compromise. You say, we agree on this, we'll do this, but in return, we also need to do something else. Mm-hmm. And the other side has got to be willing to say, yeah, okay, you get to have a little bit too. Mm-hmm. We're not at that point. In Iraq, they're not at that point.
Right.
In Syria, they're not at that point.
Well, in Iraq, we did get the democratic ball rolling, and we got a guy in place, and we hoped that he was going to include everybody else. But as soon as he got in place, he said, well, this is my chance to redeem my sect, redeem my religion. And so he placed all the people he knew from his sect in the official positions.
In Egypt,
and naturally
they did the same
and
thing.
this,
Well,
this is
We
a problem.
had democracy.
Not all-
Democracy worked, and we didn't like what had happened, so we changed it.
Not only did he do that, but when we left, he arrested all the Sunnis.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
And he came down very cruel on them.
right. But this is what's wrong. We believe democracy is the answer to everything. The democracy, the genius of America, and to a lesser extent some of the other democratic countries of the world, is the Constitution which says the majority rules but the minority is protected. Democracy without that understanding does not work.
Well, that
Does not work at all.
That actually is interesting point you bring up, because that gets me to to this role of what was his name, Robespierre.
Robespierre,
I mean,
yeah.
he thought virtue was the terror was important side of virtue. In order to get virtue, you needed to have terror.
Purification.
Purification.
Is what
that
he was all about.
I mean, that's what his
Yeah.
whole dogma was, and he got a lot of people killed because
Right.
of that.
It
But he
started-
was trying
yeah.
to do virtue,
Yes.
which I think that's
God
fascinating.
said,
Kind of
and
draconian.
therefore
Yes, but
everything's fine.
From our standpoint right now, that looks draconian, but to him, that was fair game. Which is, but that's exactly what is the danger.
Right.
And you see that happen in Iraq. You see that has happened in Egypt, and of course we have the shining example of Syria. That's what he is trying to do on his side.
Yeah, the idea that, quote, God said that, therefore I'm going to do it. The problem is that not everybody agrees what God said.
Understood.
And in often cases they're diametrically opposite.
The problem is if you woke up in the middle of the night and you heard God speaking, you're not going to say, call me up on the phone and say, did you just hear what I heard? What do you think? God said, and therefore that's what's going to be.
And luckily, if you have a whole bunch of tanks and guns and maybe even a few missiles, God has put you in charge of those, and you got to use them.
Because you're doing right.
You are doing God's work.
And again, the problem is and I'm talking now about America, not worrying about the Middle East so much, we have to understand that there are a whole bunch of people out there who have some great ideas, but they're humans as well. And you can't just trample them because you're going to do the greater good. There's got to be some acceptance, compromise that these people also deserve consideration.
I mean, you had this good example of this priest in Florida or somewhere who started burning Qurans as a signal that we can't tolerate anything else. And look at this. This is God's work. He's doing God's work. But then, if God is like that, is that what God should be doing? I mean, that's again how much.
Who are you to question what God?
Yeah, that's the problem. Who am I? But that's. I mean, you look at my God, you look at his God, you look at Quranic God. Whose God is it? Unless we agree that basically we are talking about the same thing.
Yeah, the same guy created everything.
Same guy created everything. But that's again anathema to some people, that you can't be, if you were created, it can't be my God, because you cannot be in the same God as mine, because my God is different. My God is much more important and much better than have you be created. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. You find a solution.
Getting back to the original topic, in 6 months, last 4 months, we're going to be voting
Yes.
for people who are going to serve as the board of directors of the United States of America. That's what Congress is really supposed to be. One of the issues that's guaranteed to come up is this whole foreign affairs thing. And it's not just the Middle East, it's Ukraine, it's North Korea, it's Libya, you name it. What is it that we want this board of directors to do? What do we want them to consider when they're trying to figure out what is good? Remember the quantum computer? And
I'm listening.
yeah, because that's really.
Well, I don't think that's possible. Well, actually, it is possible, in America for Americans. It's, but what we want them to consider, on the subject of foreign affairs, that's too broad. It's too broad. You have to be more specific. You have to look at each situation. I mean, the foreign affairs of the Middle East, foreign affairs of the Ukraine, the foreign affairs of China. I mean, there's where in China. I mean, it can't. You can't speak that broadly. There's too many balls in the air.
It's very simple. It's very simple.
Okay, go for it.
What will these people do to maintain the steady income of the Koch brothers? and that's
You
it.
know, I was watching.
Well,
I was watching. Okay, no, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Okay, I was watching the comedy Daily Show yesterday, and some guy has just written a book on the Koch brothers.
Wow.
And how they were brought up in this. They never had to worry about money in their lives. They are very eclectic in terms of how they and what they support. They are not totally ultra-conservative or ultra-liberal or anything. They support a lot of different kinds of dispersed causes. However, they have built what is basically a third kind of political party in the country based on their support for think tanks and 501ks and certain kinds of causes, and having been able to rally over like 300 very high income people. That's all I've got to say about
But
that.
going back to your question,
Actually,
going back to your question.
One of the things about the Koch brothers that really distresses me a lot is one of them is a contributor to Nova, and
Yes.
and,
Yeah, I knew there was something
and,
that.
I want to dislike the guy, but I love Nova.
Yes. but going back to your question, I think what overall, although it's diverse foreign policy, I think overall United States has to project project as a power that can be the go-to power and contain the advances of Russia, and somehow manage China so that in such a way that is beneficial to us, and at the same time they do not go and crush the Eastern Pacific Rim
But
people.
why does America have to
Because-
be the one who's holding up the world?
Because the
Because
problems,
Britain lost a couple of wars.
yes,
And there's nobody else.
United States is the only power that is.
England did it for 300 years.
Yes, that's good enough. Yes, I
More
mean,
than
Pass the
that. It was
baton,
400
huh?
years.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, they-
I guess the question is, if we don't, do you want China to do it, or do you want Russia to do it, or do you want us to do it?
yeah,
So somebody's going to fill the
somebody got to do
void.
it. I